Ethan Vale was born into a world where everything shined. Marble floors, tall glass windows, chandeliers that glittered like stars. His family lived in a huge mansion on a hill that overlooked the city, a place where every wall whispered power and money. People called his father Charles Vale, one of the richest men in the country. But behind the gates, beyond the luxury, Ethan lived in a world that was different from everyone else's. Ethan was blind. He had never seen the tall glass windows or the view from the hill. He had never seen his father's proud eyes or the silver car waiting outside the mansion, but he could feel the world in other ways. The way sunlight warmed his face in the morning, the sound of wind brushing through the trees, the echo of his footsteps across the marble floor, and most of all, the piano. The grand piano in the corner of the living room was his favorite place in the world. It had once belonged to his mother, who had passed away when he was little. She used to play for him every night. Even now he could remember the sound, soft, gentle, like the voice of someone who loved him deeply. After she was gone, Ethan played her songs again and again, as if through the music he could still hear her breathing beside him. When he was alone, he would sit there for hours, letting his fingers find the keys by memory. To him, each key was like a color he couldn't see, bright, dark, warm, or cold. The piano wasn't just an instrument. It was his way of seeing the world, but not everyone saw it that way. Ethan's father didn't talk much about music. He talked about business, at meetings, markets, and success. He wanted his son to be strong, independent, and capable. He loved Ethan, but he didn't understand him. To Charles Vale, music was a hobby. To Ethan, it was everything. When Ethan turned 16, his father enrolled him in one of the country's top private schools, St. Alistair Academy. It was a place where children of millionaires, politicians, and celebrities studied, the kind of place where every student carried a name that opened doors. For Ethan, it was a different kind of challenge. He was nervous the first day he arrived. The sounds were new, laughter echoing in the hallways, the click of polished shoes, the rustle of expensive uniforms. Everyone seemed to know who he was before he even spoke. "Isn't that the Vale boy?" he heard someone whisper. "Yeah, the blind one. I heard he gets special tutors and his own driver. Must be nice being rich." Ethan pretended not to hear. He smiled politely when people spoke to him, and when they didn't, he kept quiet. But inside, he felt the weight of every whisper. There were a few students who tried to be kind, but most kept their distance. They didn't understand how to talk to someone who couldn't see. Others weren't so kind. Some saw his blindness as weakness. Some saw his father's wealth as something to mock. And some, that's a few cruel ones, found both amusing. He tried to ignore it. Every day after class, he'd make his way to the music room. The old piano there became his escape. He'd sit by himself, fingers gently brushing the keys, and play until the halls were empty. That's where the teachers found him most of the time, sitting straight, expression calm, eyes hidden behind dark glasses, his fingers dancing gracefully across the keys. When he played, even the cruelest students sometimes paused. There was something in his music, a sadness but also beauty. It made people feel things they didn't want to admit. But instead of admiration, some began to feel jealousy. There was one group in particular, students from rich families who thought they ruled the school. They saw Ethan as a threat to their pride. He was quiet, polite, and somehow managed to stand out without even trying. The teachers liked him. The headmaster praised his discipline, and that didn't sit well with those who were used to attention. It started small. A missing textbook here, a chair pulled away before he sat down, quiet laughter when he tripped. He never complained. He just brushed off the dust and continued on, but cruelty often grows when it goes unchallenged. One afternoon, when the school was preparing for a charity gala, a big event where students would perform in front of guests and donors, the group saw an opportunity. They overheard the headmaster invite Ethan to play piano at the gala. It was meant to be a proud moment, a way to show that talent and courage mattered more than appearances. But to those students, it was the perfect setup for humiliation. They planned it quietly. A few hours before the event, when no teachers were around, they sneaked into the hall where the grand piano stood. They lifted the lid, giggling under their breath. And then, with cruel care, they detuned several keys, just enough to make the piano sound wrong, but not enough for anyone to notice by sight. They whispered among themselves, imagining the scene, Ethan playing, The sound turning sour, the guests frowning, his father watching in disappointment. To them, it was just a joke. To Ethan, it would be a nightmare. That evening, the mansion's car came to pick him up. He wore a black suit, his cane resting against the seat beside him. His father sat across, silent as always. "You've practiced?" His father asked. "Yes, sir," Ethan replied softly. His father gave a short nod. "Good. Remember, this is an important night. The board members will be there." Ethan smiled faintly. "I'll do my best." The hall was filled with laughter, soft music, and the clinking of glasses. Waiters moved between tables carrying trays of food. The school orchestra played lightly in the background. When Ethan entered, whispers spread through the crowd. Some were supportive, others curious. A few cruel eyes watched eagerly. He found his way to the piano with the help of a teacher, his fingers brushing the edge of the instrument. He smiled politely as applause echoed through the hall. He couldn't see the faces, but he could feel the room, the air heavy with expectation. He took a slow breath, touched the first key, and began to play. For the first few notes, everything seemed fine. But then something sounded wrong. A sharp broken note where there should have been harmony. Then another. The melody twisted, turned sour. He paused, tried again, and this time slower. But the more he played, the worse it sounded. The music that had once been his safe place now betrayed him. A quiet murmur spread through the audience. Someone laughed softly. Then another joined. Ethan's hands froze on the keys. His heart began to pound. He knew this song by heart, every note, every rhythm. He had played it hundreds of times, but now it sounded ugly, clashing, wrong. He tried again, hoping to fix it, but the sound was unbearable. The laughter grew louder. At the front of the hall, his father sat still, his jaw tight, his expression unreadable. To him, it looked like his son had simply made a fool of himself. The teacher stepped forward, whispering, "It's okay, Ethan. You can stop now." He nodded quietly, stood up, and walked off the stage. The applause that followed wasn't real. It was the polite kind, the kind people gave to cover their discomfort. He found a quiet corner behind the curtains, gripping his cane tightly. He didn't cry. He just stood there, breathing slowly, trying to calm the storm inside. He didn't understand what had gone wrong. The same piano, the same song, and yet everything fell apart. When the event ended, his father didn't say much on the way home. The silence in the car was heavier than words. Finally, his father said, "We'll talk about this later." Ethan nodded. He didn't try to explain. He didn't know how to. That night, when everyone else was asleep, he went to the piano in the living room. He touched the keys softly and began to play again, the same song. Every note was perfect. Every chord was right. It wasn't his fault. But no one knew that. He kept playing until dawn, lost in the music, lost in thought. Somewhere deep down, he hoped that if he just kept playing, he could drown out the sound of that laughter, the laughter that followed him even in silence. He didn't know it yet, but that night was just the beginning. The moment when everything changed. The world that had always been cruel would soon show him kindness in the most unexpected way, through someone who had nothing but a heart big enough to see him clearly. The next morning, Ethan woke up early. He hadn't slept much. The sound of that broken performance still played in his mind, like a record stuck on the same ugly note. He sat quietly on his bed, hands resting on his knees. His cane leaned against the wall beside him, and the soft morning light touched his face. He couldn't see it, but he could feel it, warm, forgiving, and calm. He tried to believe that maybe, somehow, it had all been a mistake. Maybe the piano really was out of tune. Maybe something happened that wasn't his fault. But then he remembered the laughter, the whispers, the way people looked at him afterward. At breakfast, his father sat at the long table, reading the newspaper. The sound of pages turning filled the silence. Ethan took his seat quietly. His father spoke without looking up. "You embarrassed yourself last night." Ethan's heart sank. "I didn't mean to, sir. I practiced." Charles cut him off. "You practiced, yet you still failed in front of everyone important to this family." His voice wasn't angry, just cold. "Do you understand how that makes us look?" Ethan's throat tightened. "Yes, sir. You'll need to work harder. Focus less on excuses and more on results." "Yes, sir," he whispered. That was the end of the conversation. His father went back to his newspaper and Ethan quietly finished his breakfast. That afternoon at school, everyone knew what had happened. News traveled fast at St. Alistair Academy. By the time Ethan arrived, the laughter had already started. When he passed through the hallway, whispers followed him like shadows. Did you hear how bad it was? Poor guy doesn't even know he can't play. I felt sorry for him. For about 5 seconds, Ethan kept walking, pretending not to hear, his cane tapping lightly against the floor. Each tap echoed louder than the last, matching the rhythm of his heartbeat. He tried to escape to the music room, but even there, peace didn't last. When he touched the piano, he hesitated. For the first time in years, his fingers didn't want to play. He lowered his hands slowly and just sat there listening to the silence. That was when a voice broke it. Hey, you were amazing last night. He turned his head toward the sound. It was soft, gentle, not mocking, not pitying. Who's there? He asked quietly. It's just me, the girl said. I work here sometimes. In the kitchen. I saw what happened, Ethan smiled faintly. Then you must know it didn't sound amazing. I know, she said honestly. But it wasn't your fault. Her honesty made him pause. What do you mean? I heard them, she said after a moment. Those boys who messed with the piano. They were laughing about it after the gala. They said they loosened the strings so it would sound bad. Ethan froze. His fingers tightened around the edge of the piano. For a moment he didn't say anything. Then quietly, they did that? Yes, she said softly. And I'm sorry. He leaned back, taking a slow breath. The truth hit him harder than he expected. A strange mix of anger and relief filled his chest. He wasn't crazy. He hadn't failed. But it also meant that the people he went to school with, people who already had everything, still chose to hurt him just for fun. Thank you, he said finally. For telling me, she hesitated. Do you want me to tell the teachers? He shook his head. No, it won't change anything. People like them always find a way to get away with it. There was silence between them. Then she asked softly, do you still want to play? He turned toward the piano again, listening to the way her voice trembled slightly like she was nervous to even ask. I don't know, he admitted. Music used to be the one place I felt free. Now I can't even touch the keys without remembering that night. She walked closer, her footsteps light against the wooden floor. I could help, she said quietly. I know a little about tuning. My dad used to fix instruments for extra money. Maybe if we fix it together, you'll want to play again. Ethan hesitated. Why would you do that for me? She smiled, though he couldn't see it. Because no one else will. There was something honest in her voice. Something that reminded him of the way his mother used to speak. He nodded slowly. All right. That evening, after everyone had gone home, the two of them stayed behind. She opened the top of the piano carefully and began adjusting the strings. The sound of the metal being tightened filled the room. Ethan sat beside her, listening closely to every sound she made. What's your name? He asked quietly. Lila, she said. And you're Ethan. He smiled slightly. You already knew that. She laughed softly. Everyone knows the billionaire's son. He sighed. I wish they didn't. She paused for a second, then said, Then tonight, you're just Ethan, the boy who loves music. For the first time in days, he felt something warm inside. When she was done tuning, she said, Try now. Ethan touched the keys, hesitated for a moment, then played the first few notes of his mother's song. The sound came out pure, not perfect, but real. He stopped midway, overwhelmed by emotion. It's right, he whispered. She smiled. Then keep going. He played again, slowly, letting the melody fill the room. Lila sat nearby, listening with her eyes closed. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever heard. The kind of sound that made you forget where you were, that reminded you of something deeper than words. When he finished, the silence that followed felt peaceful. Thank you, he said softly. You don't have to thank me, she replied. You did all the hard work, he shook his head. You reminded me why I love playing. That's something I almost lost. From that day on, they started meeting secretly in the evenings. Sometimes after her kitchen shift, she'd bring him a cup of tea and sit beside him while he played. Other times, she'd ask him to teach her simple melodies. They'd laugh when she hit the wrong notes, and he'd patiently guide her hands. To the world, they were from two different lives, the billionaire's blind son and the poor girl who cleaned up after others. But in that quiet music room, none of that mattered. Over time, Ethan began to open up. He told her about his mother, how she used to play the same piano before she died. He told her about how the sound of music helped him feel less alone. And Lila told him about her life too, her small apartment, her mother who worked long hours, and her dream of one day saving enough to study music properly. "You should," Ethan said one night. "You have the ear for it," she laughed. "Easy for you to say. You were born into a world where dreams are paid for. Mine have to wait," he smiled. "Then maybe we'll make one come true together." She tilted her head. "What do you mean?" "Let's write something," he said. "A song. Yours and mine." From that night on, they started working on a new piece together. She'd hum small melodies and he'd play them, shaping them into something whole. Sometimes they argued about which part sounded better. Other times they laughed when the tune fell apart. But through all of it, they were happy. For Ethan, it was the first time in years that he felt seen. Not as the blind son of a billionaire. Not as someone to be pitied, but simply as himself. And for Lila, it was the first time she felt that someone believed in her talent. But not everyone was happy about their growing closeness. The same boys who had humiliated Ethan began to notice the two of them spending time together. They didn't like what they saw. To them, Lila was nothing, a girl who didn't belong in their world. And Ethan was supposed to stay silent, broken, humiliated. But he wasn't anymore. He was smiling again, playing again, and that bothered them. One afternoon, as Lila walked out of the kitchen carrying cleaning supplies, she overheard them talking. "Looks like the blind boy found himself a helper," one sneered. "More like a charity case," another laughed. "Let's see how long that lasts." She ignored them and kept walking. But inside she worried. She knew people like that. The kind who smiled in public but carried cruelty like a second skin. That evening she told Ethan about what she heard. He smiled calmly. "Let them talk. They can't hurt me anymore." She wanted to believe that, but deep down she wasn't so sure. As the days passed, their song grew more complete. It was soft at first, then powerful. A story told through sound. Each note carried a piece of them both. His quiet strength, her hidden hope. When they finally played it through from start to finish, neither spoke for a long time. The music had said everything. "Promise me something," Lila said softly. "What's that?" "When the next school recital happens, you'll play this, our song. Not to prove them wrong, but to prove yourself right." He smiled. "I promise." And as he played the melody one more time, she closed her eyes, feeling every note. For the first time, she wasn't just the girl from the kitchen. And he wasn't just the blind boy with a famous name. They were two people who had found light in each other, even when the world tried to keep them in the dark. Days turned into weeks, and the quiet friendship between Ethan and Lila grew deeper than either of them expected. Every evening after classes ended, they would meet in the same music room, the one with the slightly cracked window that let in a soft golden light before sunset. That room had become their small world, a place that didn't care about last names or how much money someone's father had. Ethan would arrive first most days, sitting patiently by the piano, running his fingers along the edges of the keys while waiting. He always knew when Lila walked in, not by sound alone, but by the faint scent of soap and vanilla that followed her from the kitchen. "You're early again," she teased one evening as she entered. He smiled. "I can't help it." "The piano misses you," she laughed. "The piano misses me? Or you do?" He chuckled softly. Maybe both. Their friendship had a rhythm of its own, quiet laughter, shared snacks from the cafeteria, and long hours spent blending melodies until night crept in. They had written more than half of their song now. It had no name yet, but each time they played it, it sounded a little more like something that belonged to both of them. Sometimes, while Ethan played, Lila would just sit and watch him. His face looked peaceful when he played, as if the music allowed him to see something the rest of the world couldn't. She once asked him, "What do you imagine when you play?" He paused before answering. "I see shapes, colors, but not like everyone else. I feel them instead. Like a bright sound is yellow to me. Soft notes feel blue and low ones are heavy and dark, maybe gray." She smiled gently. "That's beautiful," he tilted his head. "What do you see when you hear music?" "I see memories," she said softly. "Good ones, bad ones. Mostly the kind I want to remember forever. Their small talks often turn deep without meaning to. That was the kind of bond they had, natural, effortless, honest. But outside that room, life wasn't so gentle. The same group of boys who had once humiliated Ethan still watched him, growing more restless each day. They couldn't stand seeing him happy. They couldn't stand the sight of him walking through the halls with quiet confidence again. Ethan ignored them. Lila told him to do the same. But cruelty rarely disappears on its own. It waits for a chance. One afternoon while Ethan was in class, Lila was called into the headmaster's office. She didn't know why. Her hands shook as she stood before his desk. "Lila," the headmaster said kindly, "I've been informed that you've been spending a lot of time after hours in the music room. Is that true?" "Yes, sir," she said nervously. "I help Ethan practice," he nodded slowly. "Ethan Vale is a special student and his father is an important supporter of this school. But some of the other students' parents have raised concerns." She frowned. "Concerns about what?" The headmaster sighed. "They think it's inappropriate for you to spend so much time alone with him. Some believe you're taking advantage of his kindness." Her face went pale. "That's not true. I would never—" He raised a hand gently. "I believe you, Lila, but you need to be careful. People talk, and when they do, it can cause problems for everyone." She left the office with tears in her eyes. She had done nothing wrong, but it didn't matter. In their world, truth often didn't stand a chance against gossip. That evening, when she came to the music room, Ethan immediately sensed something was wrong. "You're quiet," he said softly. "Did something happen?" She tried to sound calm. "Just a long day." He turned toward her voice. "You're lying. I can hear it in your tone." She sighed and sat beside him. "The headmaster talked to me. Some people think I shouldn't be here with you so much." Ethan frowned. "Why not?" "They think I'm using you," she said bitterly. "They think I'm doing this for money or attention." He was silent for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he said, "Let them talk." "I don't care what they think." "I do," she whispered. "Because they don't care about the truth. And if your father finds out, he might stop you from seeing me." Ethan turned toward her, his voice gentle but firm. "Then he'll have to try." She looked at him, surprised. "I've spent most of my life doing what other people thought was right," he continued. "But when I met you, I started living the way I wanted to. I'm not going to give that up because people can't understand it." Lila's eyes softened. "You really mean that?" He smiled slightly. "I do." She didn't know what to say. For the first time, someone had stood up. Not just for her, but with her. That night, they played their song again. It sounded stronger now, more alive, like both of them had poured every piece of their hearts into it. After the last note faded, Lila whispered, "You know, when you play, it's like the whole world listens." Ethan smiled faintly. "Not everyone wants to listen." She shook her head. "Then they're the ones missing out." They stayed like that for a long time, talking softly, laughing quietly. For a while it felt like nothing outside that room could hurt them. But the world has a way of reminding people that peace never lasts forever. A few days later, Ethan's father called him into his office at home. The air in the room was heavy. "I heard you've been spending a lot of time with a girl from the school's staff," Charles said, his tone firm but controlled. "Yes, sir," Ethan said calmly. "She's my friend." "Your friend?" Charles repeated slowly. "Do you know how that looks? A girl who works part-time in the kitchen, spending nights in the music room with you?" Ethan clenched his fists. "She's helping me." "She's the reason I play again," Charles sighed. "You don't understand how fragile reputations are in our world. People talk, investors listen. I can't have rumors affecting the family name. So my happiness doesn't matter?" Ethan asked quietly. Charles hesitated, then said, "Happiness is temporary. Legacy is not." Ethan stood up. "Then maybe I don't want your kind of legacy." His father didn't reply. Ethan left the room before the silence could swallow him whole. The next day, he didn't show up to meet Lila. She waited for hours, sitting by the piano, her hands resting on the keys. The sound of the ticking clock filled the empty room. He didn't come the next day either. Or the day after that. When she finally saw him again, it was by accident, in the hallway, guided by one of his classmates. He looked tired, distant. She called out softly, "Ethan?" He turned his head slightly, recognizing her voice. "Lila." "I thought something happened," she said, walking closer. "You stopped coming?" He hesitated. "My father found out." He doesn't want me spending time with you. Her heart sank. So, that's it? He shook his head slowly. No, I just need to find a way to fix this. I can't lose what we built. She wanted to believe him. But deep down, fear crept in. Fear that the wall between their worlds was growing taller each day. A week later, the school announced the date of the annual winter recital. Students were encouraged to perform in front of the entire academy and guests. Lila found Ethan sitting alone by the piano again, his fingers resting silently on the keys. You should play our song, she said quietly. He turned toward her. You still want me to? I do, she said. You promised, he smiled faintly. I remember. So they began practicing again, carefully, secretly. Every note, every chord became a small act of defiance. The song wasn't just music anymore. It was a voice for everything they couldn't say out loud. The closer the recital came, the more determined they became. But word got around again. The same boys who had humiliated Ethan before began whispering about how he was planning to perform some silly love song with the kitchen girl. When Lila overheard it, she felt anger rise inside her, but Ethan only smiled. Let them talk, he said quietly. They laughed once before. This time I'll give them something worth remembering. And he meant it. Each day after that, they practiced until their hands ached. Lila helped him refine the rhythm. Ethan taught her how to trust the silence between notes. They were building something beautiful, something that didn't belong to anyone but them. On the last evening before the recital, Lila asked softly, Are you nervous? Ethan smiled. I'm not nervous about playing. I'm nervous about what happens after. What do you mean? He turned his head toward her voice. After they hear it, after they know this isn't just a song. It's everything I couldn't say to you. Her breath caught in her throat. For a long moment neither spoke. Then she said quietly, Then play it like it's your heart speaking. He nodded. I will. And as they played the song one last time, the sound filled the room with something that couldn't be explained, a feeling that was gentle and strong at once. Neither of them knew what the world would say next. But one thing was certain, their music had become their truth, and the truth, once played, could never be silenced again. The day of the winter recital arrived quietly, though for Ethan and Lila it felt like a storm waiting behind calm skies. The auditorium buzzed with laughter and chatter as students, parents and guests filled the seats. Teachers rushed to organize performers, lights, and instruments. The air smelled faintly of perfume, polished wood, and nervous energy. Backstage, Ethan sat on a chair, his hands resting on his lap, trying to stay calm. Lila stood beside him, pretending to look relaxed, though her heart beat fast. You're awfully quiet, she said softly. He smiled. I'm listening. To what? The sound of the crowd, he replied. They sound impatient, she laughed gently. You can always tell, he nodded.
Sound tells me everything.
When people talk, move, breathe, I can feel their mood. Right now, they're waiting for someone to make a mistake. She leaned closer and whispered, Then surprise them. He turned his head toward her voice, his lips curling into a small smile. That's the plan. The performance list was long. One by one, students went on stage. Singers, violin players, poets, dancers. Applause followed each performance, polite and measured. Ethan listened from behind the curtains, tapping his fingers softly on his leg in rhythm. When his turn came, the announcer's voice echoed, Please welcome Ethan Vale. The murmurs in the crowd shifted. Some whispered, some chuckled quietly, remembering the embarrassing night months ago. Ethan heard every sound. He stood slowly, straightened his jacket, and reached for his cane. Lila touched his arm gently, guiding him toward the stage entrance. Her hand was steady, though her heart raced. You're going to be great, she whispered. He nodded, his voice calm. Because you'll be there. As he walked on stage, the room fell silent. The spotlight followed him until he reached the piano. He traced the edge of the bench and sat down gracefully. He didn't need to see the keys. He already knew them better than anyone else. Lila stayed backstage, hidden behind the curtains, her hands clasped tightly together. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then Ethan spoke into the microphone beside the piano, his voice quiet but firm. Before I begin, he said, I want to say something. People leaned forward, curious. Last time I played here, he continued, I was laughed at. I thought I had failed. But I learned something important since then. Music isn't about showing off. It's about feeling. And when you play from your heart, no one can take that away from you. The room remained silent. Even the ones who used to mock him lowered their eyes. Then he began to play. The first few notes were soft, delicate, like a whisper. The melody rose slowly, each sound clear and full of emotion. It was their song, the one he and Lila had written together. Every note carried their story, the pain, the friendship, the healing. Lila closed her eyes behind the curtain. She could feel every part of it, every emotion she had poured into that song. As the music grew, the crowd fell completely silent. Even those who had mocked him before couldn't help but listen. The song told a story without words and of loneliness turned into courage, of two people from different worlds finding hope in each other. Halfway through the song, Ethan tilted his head slightly and whispered, "Now." From the side of the stage, Lila stepped into the light. She wasn't supposed to perform, but they had planned this together, a surprise for everyone. She walked slowly to the microphone and began to sing the melody's final verse, her voice trembling at first, then steady and strong. Her voice and his piano blended like they had been waiting for each other all along. It wasn't just music, it was truth. The crowd watched in awe. Some gasped softly, recognizing her, the girl who worked in the kitchen, now standing proudly beside the billionaire's son. But in that moment, none of that mattered. When the last note faded, there was silence. Ethan's hands rested gently on the keys. He turned his head slightly toward the crowd, breathing quietly. Then the silence broke. Applause began, hesitant at first, then louder, growing until it filled the hall. People stood to their feet, clapping and cheering. It wasn't polite applause this time. It was real. Lila's eyes filled with tears. Ethan smiled faintly and whispered, "Did they like it?" She laughed softly, wiping her eyes. "You have no idea." Backstage afterward, people crowded around them, teachers, students, even strangers. Compliments, handshakes, and questions filled the air. But through all the noise, Ethan only wanted to hear one voice. "Proud of you," Lila said quietly. He turned toward her voice and smiled. "No, I'm proud of us." But not everyone shared that feeling. At the back of the room, his father stood watching silently. His expression was unreadable, somewhere between surprise and disapproval. Later that night after the event, Ethan sat quietly in the car as they drove home. His father hadn't said a word since the recital ended. The silence felt heavier than ever. When they reached the mansion, Charles finally spoke. "You disobeyed me," he said flatly. Ethan stayed calm. "I did what I believed was right." "By bringing that girl on stage?" Charles said sharply. "You embarrassed yourself and this family crate again." Ethan turned his face toward him. "No, father. I honored it." For the first time, people saw something real from the Vale family. Not money, not power, but honesty. Charles's voice softened slightly, but his eyes stayed cold. "You don't understand how the world works, Ethan. People see what they want to see. And when they look at her, they don't see an artist. They see a poor girl who doesn't belong beside you." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Then maybe they're the ones who don't belong beside me." Charles sighed deeply and turned away. "You're too young to understand." "Maybe," Ethan said quietly. "But I know what matters to me, and I won't give it up because it doesn't fit your idea of perfection." For a long time, neither of them spoke. The clock ticked softly in the background and the sound of rain began to fall outside. Finally, Charles said, "Go to your room. We'll talk in the morning." Ethan nodded but didn't move. He said softly, "You know, she reminds me of Mom." That made his father freeze. "She believes in me," Ethan continued, "like Mom did." "You've forgotten what that feels like," Charles didn't answer. Ethan quietly turned and walked away. Upstairs in his room, Ethan sat by the window listening to the rain. He thought about Lila, her voice, her laughter, her kindness. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing. He wouldn't let go of her. Not now. Not after everything. The next day at school, whispers spread again. But this time, they weren't cruel. People talked about the performance, about how beautiful it had been, how brave Ethan was, how Lila had sung like she was born for it. For once, the whispers didn't hurt. They felt good. Lila found Ethan sitting by the piano again, his fingers resting lightly on the keys. "Back to your favorite spot," she said with a smile. He grinned. "It feels strange when it's quiet." She sat beside him. "The whole school's talking about you. Some even cried last night, did you?" He teased. She laughed. "Maybe a little," he smiled. Then it was worth it. For the next few weeks, things slowly changed. People greeted them differently. Some even apologized for how they'd treated Ethan before. Others simply watched from afar, unsure how to act. But it didn't matter. They had already proved their point. Their song spread beyond the school too. Someone had recorded their performance and shared it online. Within days, it started getting attention. Thousands of views, then hundreds of thousands. Comments poured in from strangers saying how much the music had moved them. When Lila showed him the post, Ethan couldn't believe it. "They're saying it's beautiful," she said, reading from the screen. One person wrote, "This is what love sounds like." Ethan smiled softly. "Maybe they're right." She looked at him, her cheeks warm. "Love?" He hesitated, then said quietly, "That's what it feels like when I play with you." For a moment, she didn't speak. The room felt still, safe. Then she whispered, "That's what it feels like when I sing with you." They didn't need to say anything else. The silence between them said it all. But life, as always, had other plans. One evening, when Lila arrived at the mansion to drop off a small thank you note she'd written for Ethan, she was stopped at the gate by a guard. "I'm sorry, miss," he said. "Mr. Vale has given orders. You're not allowed in." She froze. "What? Why?" The guard looked uncomfortable. "He said it's for Ethan's own good." Her heart sank. She stood there for a long time, rain starting to fall again, soaking her hair and clothes. Then she turned and walked away quietly, clutching the note tightly in her hand. Inside the mansion, Ethan sat alone by the piano, unaware of what had happened outside. He touched the keys gently, trying to play their song, but the sound felt empty without her voice beside him. He stopped, his fingers trembling slightly. Something told him that Lila wouldn't be coming back for a while, and deep down he knew their story wasn't over yet. But the next part wouldn't be as simple as a song. Days turned into weeks, and weeks quietly slipped into months. The school year was ending, but something in Ethan's world felt unfinished. Every morning he woke to the same silence, no messages, no laughter echoing in the music room. He still went there often, sitting alone at the piano, trying to play the song they wrote together. But it never sounded right anymore. Something was missing. Her. He had tried calling, sending letters through mutual friends, even asking around the school. But Lila had disappeared completely. Someone said she left town to help her mother. Someone else said she took a job at a small cafe across the city. No one really knew. Ethan's father noticed his quietness, though he never admitted it out loud. He would sometimes pause at his son's door at night, listening to the faint sound of piano keys. Soft, broken tunes that always ended too soon. But instead of opening the door, he would sigh and walk away. Ethan didn't blame him anymore. He understood now that his father's way of loving was different. Cold, strict, and full of fear. Fear of weakness. Fear of judgment. Fear of loss. But Ethan was no longer afraid. He just felt empty. One rainy evening, he sat alone by the piano again. The sound of raindrops on the windows mixed with the quiet melody under his fingers. His hand slowed, then stopped completely. He lowered his head and whispered softly to himself, "Where are you, Lila?" Just then, the sound of the doorbell echoed through the house. He barely noticed it at first until footsteps approached and his father's voice called from the hallway. "Ethan," his father said, "someone's here to see you." Ethan turned his head slightly. "Who?" But his father didn't answer right away. There was hesitation in his voice when he finally said, "You should come downstairs." Ethan stood slowly, using his cane to guide himself toward the staircase. As he reached the bottom step, he heard a familiar sound. Soft breathing, a nervous shuffle, the faint rustle of worn shoes. "Lila?" he whispered. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling just a little. "It's me." He froze for a second, then smiled so wide it felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. She took a few steps toward him. "I'm sorry I left like that," she said quietly. "I didn't want to cause more trouble for you." "You didn't," he replied. "You were the only thing that made sense." There was silence for a moment, then she added, Your father asked me to stay away. He said it was best for your future. I thought maybe he was right. Ethan tilted his head slightly, his voice calm but firm. He was wrong. Charles stood behind them, watching the scene quietly. For once, he didn't speak. He just listened, really listened, to his son's tone, to the way his blind eyes still seemed full of light when he faced her. Ethan turned toward his father. You wanted me to be strong, he said. You wanted me to stand on my own. But strength isn't about walking alone. It's about knowing who stands with you when everything else falls apart. Charles's expression softened, though he said nothing. Lila lowered her gaze. I shouldn't have come, maybe. I just wanted to see you one last time. I got accepted into a small music program. It's in another city. They heard the recording from the recital and offered me a place. Ethan's lips parted slightly. That's amazing, she smiled faintly. It's what I always dreamed of. But I didn't want to leave without saying thank you. He took a step closer, reaching out until his hand found hers. He held it gently, as if afraid she might fade away again. If anyone should say thank you, it's me, he said softly. You helped me see the world. You made me believe that I wasn't broken. Her voice trembled. You were never broken, Ethan. Charles turned slightly, pretending to check his watch. But really, he was fighting something in his throat, something that felt suspiciously like emotion. After a long pause, he finally spoke. You said she's been accepted into a program? Lila nodded nervously. Yes, sir. He hesitated, then said, I can arrange her travel and cover the expenses. It's the least I can do. Both of them looked at him in surprise. Ethan smiled. That's very kind of you, Father. Charles cleared his throat. It's not kindness. It's investment in talent. Then his tone softened slightly. And perhaps an apology. Lila blinked, unsure what to say. Thank you, she whispered. Later that night, after she left, Ethan sat quietly by the window again. The rain had stopped and the air smelled clean and new. His father came in and stood by the doorway. She's a good person, he said quietly. Ethan smiled. The best. There was silence for a while, then Charles added, Your mother would have liked her. Ethan turned his head toward him, surprised. You think so? I know so, his father said, and walked away. Days later, Lila left for the city. Ethan went to the station to see her off. He stood there with his cane, listening to the noise around him. The trains, the people, the wind. She stood close beside him, her small bag over her shoulder. I'll write to you, she said softly. He smiled. You better, or I'll have to send a search party. She laughed, then fell quiet. You'll keep playing, right? Every day, he said. I'll keep the music alive until you come back. She hesitated, then leaned forward and hugged him tightly. He felt her heartbeat against his chest, quick, nervous, full of life. Goodbye, Ethan, she whispered. Not goodbye, he said softly. Just until next time. The train whistle blew. She pulled away slowly, her eyes wet. He lifted his hand, reaching toward the sound of her voice, and she touched it one last time before stepping onto the train. He stood there, listening until the sound of the train faded into the distance. Then he turned and smiled faintly to himself. He didn't know what the future would bring, but he knew it would have music. And somewhere in that music, a part of her. Months passed again. The world moved on as it always does. Ethan continued his studies, but his true love remained the piano. His performances became more frequent, more confident. Reporters started calling him the blind virtuoso. People came from far away to hear him play. But no matter how big the crowd, he never forgot the small, dimly lit music room where it all began. One evening, almost a year later, he was performing at a charity concert in the same Academy Hall where his humiliation had once taken place. It was full again, full of lights, applause, and memories. As he sat by the piano, he took a deep breath and began to play their song. The same one, the same melody, the one that changed everything. And just as he reached the part where her voice once came in, he heard something, soft at first, then clearer. A familiar voice from the side of the stage. He froze for half a second, his heart pounding. Lila's voice filled the hall. She had come back. The crowd erupted in surprise as she walked on stage, her hair tied back, her eyes glowing with tears. She had grown, matured, but her smile was the same. Ethan didn't need to see her to know it was real. He could feel it in the air, in the rhythm of her voice, in the heartbeat of the song. Their music flowed again, perfect, alive, whole. The piano and her voice joined like two halves of the same soul. The audience was silent, listening as if time itself had stopped. When the song ended, the room filled with applause, louder than anything he had ever heard. People stood up, cheering, crying, clapping. But Ethan didn't hear any of it clearly. He only heard her whisper beside him, "I told you I'd come back." He turned his face toward her, smiling through tears, and I never stopped waiting. They bowed together, their hands linked. Later that night, after the crowd had gone, they stayed behind in the empty hall. The stage lights were dimmed, and only the moonlight shone through the high windows. Lila sat beside him at the piano again, just like old times. "You did it," she said softly. "We did it," he replied. "And this time nobody laughed," she smiled. "They listened," he nodded. "That's all we ever wanted." She leaned her head on his shoulder and he played a soft tune. Not the old song this time, but something new. A melody still being written, full of promise. In that quiet hall, under the pale glow of the moon, two friends, two hearts, found peace in the music they created together. They had started as strangers, from different worlds, broken and misunderstood. But through kindness, patience, and faith, they found light in each other's darkness. And though life would continue with its challenges, they both knew one thing: some bonds don't fade. They only grow stronger, like music that never ends, because sometimes it takes one person's kindness to turn humiliation into hope, and one shared song to turn blindness into a way of seeing the world more clearly than ever before.